Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And on the other line, we have one of our beloved patrons and friend, Kelly Downing. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be on the podcast today. Really excited.
Well, we're excited to have you. And it's really an honor. And first of all, we want to thank you for being a patron of the podcast. And it's just pretty cool. Like I always talk about how cool it is that our patrons are mostly people who we know, that we've interacted with, that, we know their stories and they know our stories. And it's just, it's really cool. We have a really tight-knit group of patrons, and we love it. So, yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. I love that we can do that we can support the podcast, because it's something that I think that we all benefit from. I know that I do. It's kind of like in advocacy, sometimes you're working really hard and you're not seeing a whole lot of progress in a lot of cases. And I feel like every Thursday we can just tune in to the podcast, and it's like having a conversation with people who get it, and that's huge, because it doesn't happen a lot in day-to-day life.
Yeah. Well, I want to let you tell your story, because you and I connected. I don't even know when that was. How many years ago was that?
It was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
Almost.
Wow. Boy, time
or
flies.
Maybe almost 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had reached out to me, and you became my hero pretty quickly, because you're a survivor, and you basically, I don't think I was giving you any advice. I think I was just more or less there for moral support, because you were taking incredible steps to report your abuser, who is in Indonesia, and you walked into the underbelly of the beast and got a good taste of what cover-ups look like.
Yeah.
And I was just super proud of how you came out of that. I think really stronger and just more determined to speak up and to tell your story. And then soon after that, you started going public. And anyway, I don't want to tell your story for you. Why don't you walk us back a little bit, whenever you first started thinking about reporting your abuser to the missionary board?
So I had just been having struggles my entire life, and a lot of them didn't really show up in a big way until I hit my late 20s, early 30s. And I think that's just the time where you start realizing, when you're younger, it's easier to believe everything's going to get better and my life is just going to fall into place. And then I hit like my early to mid 30s, and I'm like, okay, life is not falling into place, and I'm having these struggles that I don't think are normal, because I would tell people about them and they would just stare at me blankly like, I have no idea what you mean. So I was having serious problems in relationship, and a problem with a really bad anxiety disorder, and just so many things going on. And someone in my family who had been to therapy recommended therapy to me for quite a while. And finally, I was at a breaking point. And so I went. And when I went to therapy, it was almost just like this aside, like, oh, and by the way, in addition to all this stuff, I was talking about, my family and having grown up overseas because my dad was a missionary. I thought maybe a lot of this has to do with just kind of like an instability as a kid. And then I was like, by the way, I also experienced sexual abuse when I was 6 years old. And that was kind of like, my therapist just stopped, and he's like, oh, and he kind of just switched the conversation to a completely different way. And we began to kind of explore how that had affected my life. And that was the beginning of me like really understanding what happened to me when I was 6 had impacted every single thing in my life. Like basically I had been living my entire life as a reaction to sexual abuse without realizing that that's what had happened. So that's when I first started thinking about my story. And honestly, I wasn't planning on going public with my abuser and telling anyone that knew him what he had done. It just wasn't something that was on my radar. And I didn't feel like it was my place. I was still dealing with a little bit of that kind of like the feeling of being undeserving that you kind of get when you're a victim of sexual abuse. You sort of live with that. And then it kind of, that's still the place I was when I started therapy. But eventually when I started reading more about advocacy work and people speaking out about sexual abuse, and I had looked up anything I could find on sexual abuse in the church and for Christians, and you came up, Jimmy, and I don't even remember if it was a Facebook search or if it was online, but I found like a YouTube video of you sitting on a bench and talking about sexual abuse in the church and your experience. And so that was really like very influential for me in deciding to speak up about what had happened to me.
Wow.
So, it like I can trace pretty much everything back in those early days of deciding to speak out, to hearing your story and hearing you speak about, why it's important that we speak out, because this is happening in our churches and a lot of people never stop. So maybe just to give a little bit of my earlier story, when I was 6 years old, my parents were missionaries in Indonesia, and there was a little church that we attended. And the pastor's wife had a brother who was not a church leader, but he was very immersed in the life of the church. And he was always there at Sunday school and was always friendly with the kids and would bring us candy and make art for us. He was an artist and, give us piggyback rides. And he was just somebody that our family loved. And slowly he started to kind of worm his way into our family and into my life and my heart. And eventually he sexually abused me. It happened several times. And I just remember my first experiences with anxiety being at that point as a 6-year-old. And I just bottled everything up because all I knew was that something really awful and really shameful had happened. And that as a Christian, I shouldn't have done those things. And so in my mind at 6, I had done this and it was really bad. And I couldn't get support from anywhere because I thought I could never tell anybody. So I carried that to adulthood, basically. And I would think back all the time about what had happened. I would have flashbacks to being abused and never understand why I would think about it so often. And I always just chalked it up to, oh, well, it was a bad experience, but it could have been worse. And I didn't realize that that was my way of minimizing the abuse to make it easier to deal with. But once I started dealing with it, and as I said, I started reading more about the work that people were doing to fight sexual abuse in the church, I just started to get very passionate about speaking out. And it was kind of knowing the difference between a child molester and a pedophile that kind of finally opened my eyes to understanding that the man who abused me had not just seized some random opportunity to abuse me. He had orchestrated, and he had to really orchestrate what he had done. He would find out when my parents were not going to be at the house and we would be staying with the housekeeper, and he would just randomly show up. He would come over when, my parents were out of town and the pastor and his wife were watching, all 5 of us kids, and he abused me in my own house.
Wow.
And this was all very, very orchestrated. And I realized that there's no way I was his first victim. And I started to realize for the first time that he definitely had more. So that's when I made the decision to tell. And it was difficult for a lot of reasons, but one of them being I'm 14,000 miles away from, where I was abused.
Right.
And the people that are handling the situation. And that's kind of where you came in, because I just remember sending you this like SOS message on Facebook and being like, I don't even know if I should be worried about this. Or I think the advice I wanted from you was to know if you thought that the church was responding well, because I didn't think that they were. And I wasn't sure that I was doing the right thing by speaking out at all. And I just kind of wanted some advice and some guidance. And so,
well, and I want to say too that when you sent me the information, I was really impressed that it wasn't this emotionally charged, which you would have had every right to do, to say, look, this is what I experienced. Oh my goodness. Like this guy most likely has more victims. Like, you didn't do any of that. You just laid the facts out and said, here's what happened. Here's where the guy is now. Here are the steps that have been taken. And what do you think? And I was like, I still remember. I remember the first time you messaged me, and I was like, they have done nothing to hold this guy accountable. Like, this guy, he's a deacon in the church. He has all this access to kids. It was crazy. And, that I think that kind of motivated you, because you were like really hesitant, but you were like, I think I'm going to report this to the missionary board. And, I was really impressed with that you followed through. And, so you can talk about that, your decision to report and how they responded.
Yeah. So it was like the space of a weekend. I don't understand or know. All I can say, I don't like to hyper spiritualize things, but I feel like it was God, because I went from, I will never tell on this guy because I have no right to do that, and to hurt his family. All I could think of was, he's got a wife and he's got kids, and all these people love him, and I have no right to destroy everyone's life. I mean, that's the way that I felt. I still was kind of walking around with like this, I'm not valuable and what happened to me doesn't matter kind of attitude. But it changed when it finally dawned on me that there is no way this guy stopped abusing people after me, because he never got caught and he was too good at what he was doing. So I just knew that he definitely had more victims. And when I saw him on Facebook pictures and videos, like interacting with kids in the church, it was just like this just awful feeling, like he's never stopped. And now that I know, I can't not do anything. So what makes it interesting, though, is like there's a language barrier. Most of the people in the church don't speak English. And there was an American missionary who was kind of acting as the church pastor as part of his ministry. And so I thought, well, he's the obvious person I reach out to. And I sent him a message. And I just remember, again, with that feeling of, I don't want to ruin anyone's life. And I know that this is going to be really hard for him. So I calculated the number of hours that were the time difference, so that I could be sure and message him like on a Sunday night or a Monday morning, so that he wouldn't get this information before he had to preach, because I thought that would be too much stress for him. And so I tried really hard to make it as easy as possible and just, give him the facts of what had happened. And he was gracious in his texts in the beginning, his messages, because I had actually messaged him on Facebook, and I was just like, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this because it sucks, but I need to tell you this because I'm afraid for the girls in your church and the girls that he has access to in his life, that he's never stopped doing this. And if you study anything about predators and how they are, that it's highly unlikely he ever stopped. And so, as you said, the church had done nothing. Well, this guy, he would just kept coming back to me with messages. Like in one of his first messages, he's like, "Who all have you told?" And I just got this sinking feeling, if that's his first question to me, that's a really bad sign.
Right.
Because it's almost like you're already trying to keep it quiet. Who all have you told? And I was like, well, so he just kept sending me messages, and he was placating me, and he would say super spiritual, gobbledygook. I mean, I hate to say that because he was saying things that were good spiritual advice, but it's I finally just had to tell him, I didn't come to you for spiritual advice. I appreciate it, but the reason that I came to you is because I am afraid that this man is abusing girls still, and they need help. And he had every excuse in the book. He told me basically, well, I'm really in prayer, and I'm taking you and your situation before the Lord. He just kept saying, you and your situation. Like, it's not my situation anymore. Like,
Right.
It's very much yours. It's your church, the people there that could be, being abused as we speak. And he would say, like, well, I have a lot of stuff coming up over the next few months. So I knew that he wasn't going to help.
Yeah.
So I had enlisted the help of an uncle who's a marriage and family therapist and a psychologist. And, I was asking him for advice as well. And he tried to reach out to the pastor, and the pastor just ignored him completely. And so I looked into contacting Child Protective Services, or whatever the version of it is, in Indonesia. And I didn't really have any hope. Like, I'm bringing information from 30 years back. And I know the statute of limitations there is some ridiculous number, like less than a year. It's crazy.
Wow.
So, it's really, really bad. So you're dealing with a country that's still developing, and you're dealing with, laws that are already just not very helpful to victims. But once I told him I'm looking into, these groups, like, he essentially told me, well, what you've done is he said, a threat to my ministry, my entire ministry, both now and in the future. I'm pretty sure he said I jeopardized his entire ministry now and in the future, and that to help me would be a visa violation, which was just a load of garbage. Like, it's not a visa violation to confront someone about sexually abusing children. Like, it's not. Sorry.
Yeah.
But so I went over his head. I went to the mission board. And I just realized he's not going to do anything. And after, talking to my uncle, and I'm not sure if I had sent you messages at that point, but it was just very clear. I wanted to be clear because I knew that I was going to be very emotional about what had happened to me. And I was already feeling like just, I'm the problem, and I'm a problem for everyone. And so you get that feeling, and it's like this, I wish I didn't have those like emotions to deal with surrounding the abuse, but when you've lived that, and that's just kind of how your brain has been wired, you're very sensitive to it. And I felt like I'm a problem. And I wanted to make sure from outside sources, which was one of the reasons I contacted you, that I wasn't crazy for thinking they weren't doing enough. And I wasn't crazy for thinking they needed to be doing more to protect children.
Well, I don't think I ever told you this. You had sent me the emails, both that you sent and the responses, and I was livid. I was absolutely livid, and I was like, the responses to you were snarky. They were basically trying to put you in your place, and clearly there was a strong underlying message that you need to, Kelly, you need to shut up and just let this go. And that was, it was a strong underlying message, and, incredibly to your credit, you didn't let that defeat you, and you just fought. You fought all the more, and for potential victims that this guy has.
Yeah, and that was really what motivated me the entire time. And I got the sense that they thought that I wanted some sort of retribution or to punish him somehow. They had him write me a letter of apology, which was the worst thing I've ever read, because he spent half the letter telling me that he didn't remember abusing me. And then, basically telling me that all he wants to do is serve God. So essentially, I don't remember, the worst thing that's ever happened to you that I did. I don't even remember it. And basically just minimizing everything and making it seem like it was so long ago. And I told them I didn't want an apology from this guy, but they had all these conditions for his repentance. Like, one condition is stand before the church, and they had him stand up and confess to this blanket sin, not even saying specifically what it was. And then the church pushed back against that, because they were like, why are you saying that he has to resign from being a deacon, for sin? We've all sinned. And so they essentially, at this point, the mission board had taken over, because I contacted them and said, this pastor is not going to do anything. And I've told him, and it's been 2 months since I told him that he potentially has a child predator serving as deacon in his church, and he's done nothing. He hasn't even confronted him. And so once I contacted the mission board, they kind of took over and walked him through the process of what he should do. I was just grateful they were doing anything at all. I got the feeling, like you said, that they were being kind of condescending to me and patronizing. And again, with the sending me flowery emails like, oh, the depths of man's depravity, it just, gets me every time. And I'm like, okay, can we just stick to the subject at hand? Like, I don't need you to recite a devotional to me. Like, I need you to make sure that this guy is not sexually abusing little girls, because it's horrible. And my thought process was, I have access to therapists. I have access to media that, it's starting to be a lot more, open. People are talking more about sexual abuse, and the Me Too movement hadn't begun at this point, but we were getting close. And so I thought, with all the freedom that I have to feel like I can heal, those girls have nothing, because shame is even bigger in their culture than it is in ours. And shame is huge for everyone, but there it's like everything will shame you for the rest of your life, and people lose faith, and it's this huge deal. So for girls to come forward and be like, oh yeah, this guy sexually abused me, it's not going to happen. So he essentially just had free reign to do whatever he wanted. But the church, when the church pushed back and said, we don't want him to resign, what the mission director had the pastor do was take my letter where they had asked me for a description of the abuse that I had experienced. And I had written out a description as part of my therapy. And I said, I didn't want to have to tell it again. So I was just like, here's the description. Please don't share this with anyone, because even my own mom, who I'm super close to, doesn't know any of these details. So they thought it would be a good idea to stand in front of the church and read it word for word to the entire congregation and tell me about it after the
I had forgot about that until you just said that. I totally forgot about that. That is awful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was probably the worst part of the whole process. I just felt sick. I felt so sick. And then it's like, one by one, these people that I had known since I was a little kid, they started blocking me on social media. And like, that might not seem like a huge deal, except you're already feeling like, okay, I'm the problem here because I'm annoying a pastor, I'm annoying a mission board, I'm annoying an entire church. And now these people, like, they don't even want, to know that I exist. They just blocked me out of their lives, and not a word. And it was just the ultimate slap in the face a few weeks later when I saw pictures of my abuser back in the pulpit. And I know he wasn't preaching, he was leading song or something, but to me, that was not a sign of repentance. And to this day, he continues to work with kids in that church. There are pictures of him leading puppet shows and vacation Bible schools where they invite all these little kids from surrounding neighborhoods. A lot of them are not Christian, a lot of them are Muslim, and they'll invite them and bring them in and share the gospel with them. But they're sharing the gospel with them with the help of a man who preys on little children. And, it's to this day, lapse is that not only the Indonesian people who are related to him in the church blocked me on Facebook, but the pastor who I initially sent the story to blocked me on Facebook as well.
Wow.
Because he realized that I could see that they were, the things the church was posting. And I could see that this guy, he's not repentant, because 2 weeks after he tells everyone, that he sexually abused multiple girls, because they strong-armed him into confessing to more than just me, essentially. And I don't think he confessed to anywhere near the number of victims that he's actually had, and probably continues to have, because there hasn't been any consequence except he had to be embarrassed in front of the church. That was it.
Wow. Well, I think it's absolutely a shame that this battle to fight for the innocence of other children, when we know that there's a predator, we know what these people did. We know that they did it serially. They did it repeatedly. They did it in a calculating way. And then it's up to the survivors who already endured all of that abuse and humiliation and everything that goes along with that. It becomes up to them to be the watchkeepers in the church. For a church that you're not even at. You're 14,000 miles away. And you're acting as the watchkeeper for the church. It's insanity. This is what makes me so mad about churches that respond poorly to abuse. It's not that hard. I mean, Mom, you were there when we reported. You reported with me.
Yeah.
It wasn't rocket science, was it?
Nope. I'm
I don't get it.
sitting here listening to Kelly tell her story, and it's heartbreaking. It is.
I know.
Every bit of it is. And the story, Kelly, your voice is so clear, so strong, so sincere, and to be shut out by so many people has got to have impacted you also. It has to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, earlier in your story, where was your support? Who supported you? And boy, you've been fighting a battle pretty much alone. It's been hard. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I truly cannot imagine. And I don't yet understand why people do, people do this. I don't get it, except it's the easier way, it's the easier thing to do. Just turn your head and pretend. Just pretend. And it's time that stops. It thank God for your voice. Thank God for who you are. And keep it up. Keep it up.
Well, and I think there are so many other layers of trauma that people don't understand. Like, this stuff, it takes its toll. It takes its toll on you physically, emotionally, spiritually. And this, I hope it's okay to say this, but, in the middle of all this, your dad had a major stroke. And, your family, who has been incredibly supportive of you. I absolutely adore your family, and I've never met them. Your mom and your dad and your uncle are like, they're secretively my heroes. They're just incredible people. And, here you were fighting, you're fighting for justice. You're being shut out by all of your friends who you thought were your friends and fellow brothers and sisters, in Christ. They're unfriending you on Facebook. And then in the middle of that, your dad has a major stroke, and now you're caring for your own father. I think people don't realize, these church leaders who say, "Oh, well, gee, Kelly, you're going to hurt my ministry." They have no freaking idea how tough it is for survivors and people who've lived that, how far-reaching those ripple effects are and how deep they run. And, incredibly to your credit, you've been writing about it. You started a blog, and then you recently started Survivor Sanctuary, your podcast. So I'm going to promote Kelly Downing, Survivor Sanctuary. And Kelly, I do hope that this takes off like crazy, and that you you do Patreon too, because we will be your first patrons. We will happily support. I love your podcast, so I'm just going to throw that out there. I think it's incredible. I think it's really cool that you're not only standing, but you're standing tall, and you're just so put together and wise. And I don't know, you impress me, and I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful that the advocacy community has your voice, and it just shows that these church leaders can beat survivors down, but they won't defeat them. And you're living proof of that.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, Jimmy. And again, I think it's like just having the resource. I mean, now we have your podcast, and we've had it for a while now, and it's just been amazing. But before that, just that somebody kind of gets it, and knowing that somebody has your back, even if it's a person that you've never met before, just you taking the time to answer Facebook messages and read through, when you told me I sent you all the correspondence between the church and me, and the mission board and me. And when you told me you'd read every word, I was like, oh, okay, wow, that was a lot of stuff to read. And, you took the time and just it's that support, because I mean, you said like, I have it all together. I definitely don't.
Yeah.
I just hide it well on a microphone, but and on a Facebook platform, but it takes a huge toll. And what takes the biggest toll is that you do all the work, and then the man who you're trying to stop is still working with kids, so
Yeah.
I did it all,
Yeah.
stuck my neck out and lost friends and took, got a lot of ridicule. And I'm not saying like, oh, poor me, I did it to try and help stop him.
Yeah.
And he's still in the church, and there are still missionaries who, they're there and they're working with him, and they're supporting that church that is essentially enabling him to continue to be a predator. And I don't have any proof of that. I just know, based on everything I've read about, studies of predators, that he's never stopped. And so all I know to do is just keep talking about it.
Well, I think too, in your case, at least for now, and definitely this side of eternity, you've not seen justice served in your case. That's a reality. That's a fact. However, by you speaking up, just like you said that I empowered you, which I had no idea until today. I didn't know. And I remember shooting that video sitting on the bench. That was up in a field across from my house. And it was so cheesy. And I remember like, I am terrible in front of a camera. And I'm extremely extroverted, so I need an audience and I need to be looking at people. So I'm sitting there. We retook that. That was actually
I remember.
That was Alex who took that.
Yes,
my sister who disclosed to me.
Yes,
she was the reason that we reported my dad, my youngest sister, and she was shooting that video. she was like trying not to laugh, and I was like, all right. I was like, cut, and we retook that so many times because I was just so awkward, and I hated it. And finally we put it up, and I hated that video, but we put it up anyway. And who knew that was the video that made you feel
I was
comfortable
going
to
interject
talk.
something too, as Kelly was talking, that she said, I don't know of anything else to do except to keep on talking.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, that's the most important thing you can do, is to keep on talking.
Absolutely. Because it empowers other people.
Right. You have no idea how many women and younger girls that you're impacting to find their voices, to speak out. And maybe the predator who came after you, who harmed you, continues on. However, you have no idea how many others you will stop in the process by you speaking out. So, keep on doing that, please. Keep on.
Well, and
I definitely will.
Yeah, and we'll put our big plug in again as we wrap up here. So go on Facebook and look for No Less Than Light, and you'll see Kelly's smiling face there. Click like so that you can follow it. And then also on No Less Than Light, she highlights her new podcast, which you've only been doing now for 6 weeks?
Yep,
is that right?
This is the 7th episode that came out today.
So 7 weeks now. And it's Survivor Sanctuary, and you can find that at survivorsanctuary.com. And make sure that you subscribe, follow that podcast, and I love listening to you. So that's pretty cool. This kind of came back full circle. And who knew when you first messaged me that we'd be joining advocacy together and hosting each other. Hopefully you'll host us on your podcast sometime.
Absolutely.
And it's just cool. It's very cool how God works, and he is definitely using our stories of pain and tragedy and brokenness to help other people. And that's a God thing. That's nothing that we do, except we're just his mouthpiece. And like Mom said, I hope that you continue to be a mouthpiece and keep speaking up, keep doing what you're doing, keep writing. and it's just empowering so many people. So we're super thrilled to have you, and it's been an honor.
It's been my honor. I really appreciate it, guys. I love the podcast and look forward to it every single week, and just super excited to be a part of it. So,
right on. Well, until the next episode, we will catch you all later.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.